I have a new book out called 25 Women, and I feel like a teenage girl who comes home with a beautiful baby. You know, she just walks in the door and she's got this lovely child in her arms, and her parents and family, rather than going up to the baby and say, "Ooh, coochie, you do pretty baby, who's a pretty baby?" The family wants to know where the baby came from, you know, and this seemed totally unfair to me. And but this is the way I feel about this book. And nobody wants to talk about the essays. Everybody wants to know where it came from. And where it came from was an essay on I would say, feminist by default. I was trying to put together a group of essays on the best artists and the best writing that I had done that had not been reprinted. Now, most of my essays for big institutions are reprinted in Europe or in Asia or in Korea, and so I eliminated everything that had been reprinted, and I looked down, and 90% of the work that had not been reprinted was about women artists. And so then I decided, well, that'll be cool, you know, and that I would do a book about women artists, not for, any particular ideological reasons, just because I thought it would be a kick, you know, and having been kicked back, I guess it was. But my point is, this is a book about 25 women. It does not have one idea. There is no covering generalization. There are 25 essays. It has 25 ideas. And if you'll excuse me, I will give you an idea of an idea. This is an essay about Fiona Ray's painter. She's a British painter. And I'm reading from the middle of the paragraph. My first impression, these are the kind of paintings you make when you're on your own, when you can't depend on anyone for anything, when you can't improvise or update anyone or harmonize with anyone, as Rosenquist might be said to harmonize with Wesselmann, or LeWitt might be said to harmonize with Judd. When you can't presume that there is anyone in the know. In this respect, Ray's new paintings propose a solid answer to a question everyone has been asking for 2 decades. What will good art look like when the idea of good art finally disappears? When diversity reaches the threshold of entropy, when all the tribes of modernism are once and forever shattered, intermingled, and dispersed, and the covert bonds of knowing between artists, dealers, critics, and collectors have evanesced into the air. That's an idea. And that's the subject of the essay on Fiona's paintings. It's like, what do you do when you don't know what good is? What do you do when no one knows what good is? Not even. You know, and how in the world do we come to terms with it? Now, in these essays, every essay has an idea. And the reason is, when I write an essay, I start off with two generalizations. Thank you, dear. I start off with two generalizations. I feel like Eddie Van Halen. One is, I have an artist, she has a name, I have a body of work. Now, what I do at this point is specify. I try to specify the artist and specify the work in some sort of sequence that has a story, that has an idea, that has a beginning and an end. That's what I do. Now, for 20 years, as you doubtless have noticed, we don't do that. We have an artist with a name. We have a bunch of art that's vaguely related to one another, unless it's that Genskin lady. And Then from there, we generalize about the status of women in the history of Western civilization. We don't bother with the specificity. We don't bother with the idiosyncrasy. We move immediately to the level of metaphysical generalization. That's fine. But I would like to think that that job is done by the people who read this book and not by me. It would be incredibly insulting for me to make any generalization about how these women all come together and what sort of feminist issues all these women share, because they don't. Do you understand? These are very, very different women, and they are, if I had renamed the book as I intended to, if I had renamed the book as I had intended to, I would have just called it Alphas. Because all of these women are alphas. None of them had any problems getting a show. None of them had any problems even getting a boyfriend. None of them had any problems having a career. None of them are having any problems with menopause. All of them seem to be doing just fine. Now, what do you do with that? Do you understand? Because what happens is the effect of this group of women, these alphas, to the average reader who is probably a female artist, is to say, well, they did it and you can't. Now, that was not my intention, but at the same time, that is the inference that one must necessarily draw. So I wrote these 25 essays. I wrote them because the women who made the art asked me to write the essay. In other words, these are all voluntarily commissioned essays. I didn't go out and sort of attack anyone on the street and say, oh, let me write about you. That's why Yayo Kusama is not in here. But a little in joke. I can't tell you what Yayo told me in '74. But if I made her famous, she would have performed an act of stunning eccentricity. But the general feel of all of this then is to operate from some kind of story, from some sort of autobiographical detritus. Now, what I mean by this is any autobiographical fact that you know about a woman artist comes out of the art. That is, if Alexis Smith had in fact been a bus driver rather than an artist, the fact that she grew up on a hospital grounds of a mental ward would not be important. But it's important because of the art she made. None of the biographies of Picasso would mention any of the things they mentioned were it not for Picasso's art. And that is exactly where all of the sort of biographical information comes from. The autobiographical information comes from my effort to demonstrate my own prejudices so that you shan't be seduced by my glamorous tongue. So I always say I'm cheating here, and then I go on and cheat. And so that is the general system of it. Now, to speak for my own taste, all of these essays were requested, but they were also accepted by me. In other words, all of these women artists are artists who fall within the ranges of my taste. Very tidy art. I also like really incredibly messy art that's made with stuff piled up and picked up off the floor and all of this. I like that. I like the other. Everything in between, in my view, is student art. You understand? You don't have the guts to be rigid. You don't have the guts to be messy. You're a student artist. That's my plan anyway. So the essays in this book vary widely in the manner of address which the artists take. Now, there are relationships. My wife is saying, talking to the mic, Dave. This really feels weird. We're gonna roll, baby. No party tonight. Okay. She's an idiot. My point is that once you have a story, and once you have a story being just sort of the events that take place in the essay, once you have some biographical information, once you have successfully described the art, and in that description communicated your ideology, once you have all that, the essay is written. The essay begins with an introduction called A Ladies' Man. Two of the reviews had the arrogance to presume that I meant this in its literal sense. So from now on, you may presume that anything that's trite, I don't mean in its literal sense. The artists in this essay: Alexis Smith, Joan Mitchell, Linda Benglis, Via Selmans, Pia Fries, Fiona Banner, Sarah Charlesworth, Mary Heilman, Jennifer Steinkamp, Michelle Fierro, Bridget Riley, another about Bridget Riley, Elizabeth Murray, Karen Carson, Ann Hamilton, Vanessa Beecroft, Ronnie Horn, Fiona Ray, Barbara Bloom, Sharon Ellis, Hung Liu, Teresita Fernandez, Nancy Rubens, and Elizabeth Payton. Now, that is a pretty free-form list of artists. I presume that you've heard of a lot of them, and those you haven't, you should find out about. But I think that the point I am making is that what I like is difficult art. I like it when it's difficult. I like it when it's far away and hazy and still full of certainty. This is really what appeals to me as a critic. I like it to be hard to figure out, but I also like it to have immediate authority. So if you see something that you know means something and you haven't got the faintest fucking idea what that thing is, then you're in my ballpark. Do you understand? That's what I like. I like it when it's faint and it's confusing. What came out of these collections of essays were peculiar little subgroups of, say, artists from the South. A couple of them, Nancy Rubens, Teresita Fernandez, people like that, who have some connection to the profusion of the South in the same way that, say, Rauschenberg does. And then you have artists from the Ivy League who are mostly interested in extremely refined distinction, like Sarah Charlesworth, who represented what I thought was going to be the revolutionary group of women's artists, which is Laurie and Cindy and Sarah. I thought they were going to change everything. They changed their own prices, but they did not have any real effect. And all three of these women, I think, were the only women I know who actually learned something from Andy Warhol. That is, who learned how to make a photograph that was completely disingenuous. And I think that, you know, if you can do that, you know, if you can look at a Cindy Sherman and say, whoa, that's a fake, then Cindy achieves her point right off the bat. Or I guess what you really want to say is that, oh boy, that looks like a movie still. That looks completely fake. I think that's what you want to, how you want to respond. is with that kind of challenge. So all of these women have their own eccentricities. Barbara Bloom in here, and if y'all don't know Barbara, you should read something about her, because she is an amazing artist. She is really about, the name of my essay is Barbara Blooms, and she is really about the fragrance of ideas. The floating fragrance of a group of ideas put together. And it always folds out and folds out. The example that I always use when I don't have slides, and if I did have slides, is her version of Playboy in Braille, which I thought was just brilliant. I mean, you do want Playboy in Braille, don't you? But then, when you run your hand over the Braille, it's a caress. You understand? Is that the visual, the language of touch, the eroticism of touch, has been teased out of these forms, and the idea of vision has been destroyed. And this is kind of amazing. And so I was left with the difficult assignment of writing an essay about an artist whose works you can't describe. In other words, that all you can do with Barbara is find equivalent experiences in the world that have to do with her objects. And so this sort of thing is the thing that I sort of find to be amusing and exciting. To give you two other examples, and these are only two of many examples in this book, it is the idea of just leaving where we are, of just saying, fuck fashion, and going wherever you want to go. Back in my days in New York, Mary Hauman had a loft on Lafayette Street, and on the roof of this loft she had one of the greatest and biggest urban pot gardens in the world. So if you look here, see right there, right, that little green thing, that's Mary tending her pot garden. And she was, again, as she said herself, a surfer slut when she was a child. She was dedicated to being hip, so she and all of her friends couldn't find hip clothing, like the black stockings and everything like that. So in order to find all of this hip clothing, they had to go to the nun store. So they would go to the nun store to buy black apparel that they could wear to the coffee houses of San Francisco and listen to Jack Kerouac do poetry to jazz. And then we would all go surfing, although they didn't surf at Mavericks at that time. Now, Mary was, as you might assume, a live wire. And she would go around Max's all the time, and she would ask different people. She would ask different people, hello. She would ask different people, is painting dead? Now, she could ask Richard Serra, and he would always say, yes, yes. But there were a lot of people in Max's that said, no, painting will survive, painting will go on forever. And so she just kept asking people if painting would survive. And one day in the late 70s, she did a survey, and everybody said that painting was dead. And Mary Hauman became a painter. Do you understand? I mean, she immediately became a painter, but she was a painter who had grown up as a ceramist, making pots. And so as a ceramist, she didn't give doo-doo about the edges. She liked the top, she liked the bottom. The edges tended to all wash out or turn wonky or something like that. These made very persuasive objects. Also, Mary was part of a group of minimalist object makers. And so Mary found herself searching out canvases that had been bowed, that were bent like this. So when they hung on the wall, they looked like minimalist objects, but they still looked like paintings. Rosamond remembers those days. But I thought this was brilliant. It's just like, holy shit, Mary is painting paintings and they look like pots and they look like minimal objects, and what the hell are we doing here? And so I really love Mary's work. Another example, Jennifer Steinkamp. Jennifer was well into the 1970s as a young person when she fell in love with Michael Snow and Stan Brakhage, who were so over. Do you understand? I mean, they were over. Nobody talked about Michael Snow and Stan Brakhage but Jennifer. And Jennifer went back to the drawing board and began to make abstract digital drawings based on the narratives in Snow and in Brakhage. She's like Gauguin. She just got in a boat, flew off to the late '60s to make this kind of very odd cinema. My point is that for 20 years, she was the only person making videos who truly made abstract videos. And she truly never sold one until she put a little leaf on one of the little vines. Then it looked like a tree. Then she sold everything. But my point is that abstract video was completely dead. Stan Brakhage was completely dead. Michael Snow was completely dead. That's why you have never heard of them. And but like Gauguin going off to the South Seas, Jennifer just took a little trip back to the late '60s. And this happens, and I think women are predisposed to discover these moments because they can find themselves more or less choked in the desires of big white people like me. And so I was really impressed by that. Now, other things happened that were not so happy. I was a friend at this period with Linda Benglis when she was living with Klaus Cortez, whom she turned gay, you might say. She could have turned me gay too. And they lived in a lovely little loft with a beautiful graphic pencil Agnes Martin and a bed, and that was it. And with Linda's work and Klaus's. Linda found herself being discovered, and Linda was always what you would call a hometown artist. She was from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and not shy about it. She was a haughty southern bitch and not shy about it. She was beautiful and had a butt to die for. And but she started making art that was grounded in what she grew up looking at, which is oil slicks on the bayou. And she would pour these long stretches of paint across the room to approximate an oil slick, only way cooler. You know what I mean? There is a room in Fort Worth until recently that had one of these on the floor at the Whitney. And this was Richard Serra, Barry LeVay, Saul LeWitt, the usual white guys. Now, so Linda was the single girl and the youngest person in this show. And we discovered something about the boys in New York is that if you were an unattractive artist who was a woman, they loved you. If you were beautiful and sexy and a good artist, they hated you. And they hated Linda, and they wanted her piece out of the show. They kept trying to figure out a way. They wanted to put her work on a tilted platform, which sort of destroys the oil slick effect. Finally, this was in the days when people like Richard and and Barry and everybody actually had power over curators. And so they finally got Linda's piece moved to the downstairs space before you got onto the elevator to go to the real art. And so Linda, and even though she probably shouldn't have done it, said, well, fuck you. And she rolled up her oil slick and took it home. Now, I find this very interesting, first of all, because all of these guys got together and discovered that it wasn't the absence of language they were interested in. They were interested in the absence of écriture, with the inference of any sort of writing, with the inference of any sort of color. They wanted it to look like the Declaration of Independence without words. That's why I used to call them the Foundling Fathers. But the situation was such that had Linda left that piece in that show, I really think she could have changed the history of art. Because when she took it out, she was already the most famous person in the show, because of all of the controversy in the papers. First of all, she had color and nobody else had any color. Second of all, she was beautiful and bounteous and all of those things. And if the show had gone on, Linda would have been spectacularly famous. Now, Linda was always as famous as Linda wanted to be, of course, but at the same time, I think the history of art missed the curve, missed the exit by taking Linda out of the show. So today, when we see that very famous picture of Linda naked with the double-headed dildo coming out from in front, looking at you that way, I tend to see it silhouetted against smoke and ashes and destruction, because a very peculiar thing happened at that time during the art world. This is 72, 73. And I'm sure there are people like Rosamond who remember this, and many of you, Alex and Scott and all of you. What happened is, coming out of the cynosure of minimalism, was a whole new kind of art that professors could understand. And so all the professors in the world started coming to New York to teach something called visual culture or visual studies. Now, visual studies, as you know, differed from real art in that the X-Men were just as important as Andy's Maryland. And so you just mixed it all up, and all the discrimination and nuance of art disappeared. Therefore, in about 2 years, Ellsworth moved to up the Hudson to Spencertown. John Chamberlain, Robert Rauschenberg, Jim Rosenquist all moved to Florida. Bruce Nauman moved to Galisteo. I could go on forever. Thea Selmans and Judy Chicago and Linda all moved out here into this neighborhood. What happened was, if you had, and at that time I was a young critic, so I really valued my contact with older artists. You know, I really love to talk to Jim Wesselman. He's crazy as a bedbug, but enlightening. And all of a sudden, they were all gone. You know, Dan Flavin was out in the Hamptons looking at TV. And so we had one nice discussion about what is the one with the astronaut and the genie? I Dream of Jeannie. You know, so I had a nice discussion with Dan about I Dream of Jeannie. But everybody left. And everybody left, and there was nothing left but visual studies professors. Around this time, I was on a panel with some visual studies professor who you probably would know, and myself and DJ Spooky, who had a great big hat on. And at this point, I began to get the feeling that the art world had changed substantially. Now, all of the people who had moved, of course, continued to make art, and their art was sometimes shown in the big gallery, but mostly, as any of you art dealers here would know, it was purchased and put in the back room, and in the front room was some piece of installation abject art with underwear and coat hangers and all sorts of ugly, unsellable stuff, so we could funnel the people into the back room to buy the Klaus Oldenburg. That was, what's her name? Margot's great trick, was to funnel people into the back room. And I noticed she just gave millions of dollars to someone, and I want my money back, you know? What was that she gave?
UCLA.
Huh?
UCLA.
UCLA. Great. Let me tell you about UCLA. They offered me a job. They asked for a list of all my writings, and I got them all together and sent them to them. And I don't keep very good books, and so they discovered some of my writings. Yes?
Sorry, do you need to close the gallery in 20 minutes?
That's fine.
So,
I'm going to stop right here in a second. What were we talking about?
UCLA.
Huh?
UCLA.
Oh, UCLA. And then Margot gave all this money to UCLA, and I want some of my money back out of that. But I think that you will see that all of these artists have their stories. My friend Karen Carson, if you're not in the art world, you don't know Karen Carson. If you are in the art world and you know Karen Carson, then your life is better and a lot more fun. And so when you're in the art world, Karen has this idea of the artist as couturier. She comes out with a new line about every 18 months. The new line has nothing to do with the old line. The art is all first rate, and she's very happily crazy. And with doing all of these things, and what I'm trying to give you some sense is the dispersal of interest and narratives in all of these women. And don't get me started about Bridget Riley. You probably had Bridget for 6th grade algebra. You know, and everybody went in around and said, "Oh, Miss Riley, she's real strict," you know, and she is, as a matter of fact. She takes paintings out of shows and that she doesn't like. But my point is that there are 25 stories here. There are 25 ideas here. If you would like to make generalizations about the future of female artists, you're welcome to do so. I do not think that it is my job. And I thank you very much for listening to me rattle here for a little bit.